115 people. An entire settlement. Houses, food, supplies, children, everything was there. And then, nothing. One day, they were just gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle, no fire, no wreckage. Just one single word, Croatoan, carved into a wooden post. That's it. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is actual recorded history from the year 1590. And to this day, over 400 years later, nobody knows with absolute certainty what happened to those people. This is the story of the Roanoke Colony, America's oldest, most haunting, and most completely unsolved mystery. And I'm not just going to tell you the mystery today. I'm going to walk you through the real timeline, the actual archaeological evidence that's been found, the theories that historians and scientists have seriously debated, and the one explanation that makes the most sense but still hasn't been officially confirmed after 4 centuries. Before we get into the disappearance, you need to understand why Roanoke even existed. Because this wasn't just some random adventure, this was a calculated political move. It's the 1580s. England and Spain are in a Cold War that keeps heating up. Spain has already planted its flag in Florida, and England is watching nervously. The whole new world is up for grabs, and whoever controls North America controls trade routes, resources, and global power for the next century. Queen Elizabeth I needed a foothold in America, fast, so she gave permission to a man named Sir Walter Raleigh, explorer, soldier, royal favorite, to go claim land in the name of the English crown, explore it, settle it, and make sure Spain couldn't take it. In 1585, the first attempt happened. A group of soldiers and explorers landed on Roanoke Island, which sits just off the coast of what is today North Carolina. It didn't go well. Conflicts broke out with local Native American tribes, supplies ran dangerously low. The group abandoned the settlement and sailed back to England within a year. But Raleigh wasn't done. In 1587, a second expedition set sail, and this time it was different. This wasn't just soldiers, this was 117 civilians, families, women, children. One of them was a pregnant woman named Eleanor White, whose father, John White, was appointed as the colony's governor. These people weren't just exploring, they were moving permanently. On August 18, 1587, just weeks after landing, Eleanor gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare. She became the first English child ever born in the Americas. It was a moment of celebration, a sign that this was real, that this was home. Everything seemed like it was going to work out. But there was a problem. Supplies were critically low. The colony needed food, medicine, and equipment, and they needed it quickly. So John White, the governor and the newborn Virginia Dare's grandfather, made the hardest decision of his life. He would sail back to England, gather supplies, and return as quickly as possible. The entire colony begged him not to go. "Don't leave us here alone," they said. "We don't know this land. We don't have enough food. What if something happens?" But there was no other option. White promised them he'd be back within a few months. He stepped onto that ship, he looked back at his daughter, his granddaughter, and 114 other people, and he left. Here's where the story takes a brutal turn. John White arrived in England in late 1587, fully expecting to load up a supply ship and turn right back around. A few months, that was the plan. Instead, he walked into a nightmare. England was at war. The Spanish Armada, the most powerful naval fleet in the world at that time, was preparing to invade England. Queen Elizabeth I issued a war order. No ships could leave English ports. Every available vessel was needed for national defense. Nobody was going anywhere. White was trapped. He begged, he pleaded, he tried every political connection he had. Nothing worked. It wasn't until 1590, 3 full years later, that John White was finally able to get on a ship headed back to Roanoke. Think about that. 3 years. His daughter, his granddaughter, 115 people. No word, no contact, no way of knowing if they were alive. The ship finally reached Roanoke Island on August 18, 1590. Coincidentally and heartbreakingly, it was Virginia Dare's 3rd birthday. White rushed ashore and found nothing. The settlement was completely abandoned. The houses were gone, not destroyed, but deliberately dismantled, like someone had packed up and left intentionally. The heavy cannons they'd brought were half buried in the ground. Personal belongings were scattered around, but there were no bodies, no graves, no signs of violence or panic. Then White noticed something carved into a wooden post near the entrance of the settlement. One word: Croatoan. And on a nearby tree, just the letters C-R-O. White actually felt a strange relief at first. Before he left, he and the colonists had made an agreement. If they had to leave the settlement for any reason, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree. And if they left under threat or distress, they would carve a cross above the name. There was no cross, just the word Croatoan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, modern-day Hatteras Island, and also the name of a friendly Native American tribe that lived there. The Croatoan people had actually been helpful to the English settlers. One of their members, a man named Manteo, had even traveled to England and back with earlier expeditions as a cultural liaison. So White was convinced. They went to Croatoan Island. They're safe. Let's go get them. But then a massive storm hit. The ships were badly damaged. The crews refused to risk sailing further. And with no supplies left and dangerous weather bearing down, the captain made the call to abandon the search and head back to the Caribbean. White never returned to Roanoke again. He spent the rest of his life trying to organize another search expedition. Nobody funded it. Nobody helped. He died in Ireland around 1606, never knowing what happened to his family. For centuries, Roanoke was just a ghost story, a mystery with no leads. But in the last few decades, actual evidence has started to surface, and it's genuinely fascinating. The Dare Stones controversy. In 1937, a man named Lewis Hammond showed up in North Carolina, claiming he'd found a stone with a carved message from Eleanor White, Virginia Dare's mother. The message allegedly described the colonists fleeing disease and Native American attacks and gave directions to more stones. Over the next 2 years, nearly 50 more stones were found across Georgia and South Carolina, all supposedly from Eleanor, documenting the colony's final years. Historians were excited for about 5 minutes. Then they tested the stones and found that many of them were likely forged. The carvings were too fresh, too convenient. The whole thing was probably an elaborate fraud. But here's the interesting part. The first stone, the original one found by Hammond, has never been conclusively proven to be fake. Some researchers still believe it might be authentic. The jury's still out. The Croatoan Archaeological Project. Starting in the early 2000s, a team from the First Colony Foundation, a group of serious historians and archaeologists, began systematic excavations on Hatteras Island, which was historically Croatoan territory. In 2012, they made a significant discovery. They found a ring, identified as an English signet ring from the late 1500s, buried in the soil. It was the kind of ring that a person of some status would wear. English, colonial era, on Croatoan land. They also found fragments of European pottery, gun components, and other artifacts consistent with English settlers from the 1580s, all mixed in with native Croatoan artifacts. This is real, documented, peer-reviewed archaeological evidence, and it strongly suggests that at least some of the colonists ended up on Hatteras Island and lived among the Croatoan people. The Lumbee connection. There's one more piece of evidence that's harder to quantify, but genuinely compelling. The Lumbee people, a Native American tribe from the Carolinas, have long maintained an oral tradition that they descend, at least partially, from the Roanoke colonists. When English settlers first encountered the Lumbee in the 1700s, they were shocked to find a tribe that already spoke English, had English surnames, names like Dare, White, and Sampson, and some members had notably lighter features than neighboring tribes. The Lumbee have been fighting for full federal recognition for decades, partly on the basis of this mixed heritage. As of today, they have partial recognition, but not full federal status. DNA studies on this are ongoing, but early results have been inconclusive, not because the theory is wrong, but because tracing 400-year-old ancestry through modern genetics is genuinely difficult. So why does a 400-year-old disappearance still matter today? A few reasons. First, it's a reminder of how fragile early American history actually was. We tend to imagine the colonization of America as this confident, inevitable march of progress, but Roanoke tells a different story. These were desperate, terrified people, abandoned by their government, trying to survive in a world they didn't understand. And they may have only survived by doing something that English society at the time considered unthinkable, assimilating into a Native American community, giving up their English identity entirely to survive. That's not the story we usually tell about this era. Second, the mystery highlights how much history gets lost. We have thousands of records from this period about ships, trade, and politics, but the actual lived experiences of 115 ordinary people, their fear, their choices, their fate, vanished almost completely. History is full of these silences. Roanoke just makes that silence visible in a way that hits differently. Third, and maybe most importantly, the evidence we do have points to a story of cooperation, not catastrophe. The most likely explanation, based on everything archaeologists and historians have found, is that the Roanoke colonists didn't die in some dramatic massacre. They walked away from the settlement intentionally, divided into smaller groups, and integrated with friendly native tribes, primarily the Croatoan, and lived out their lives in relative peace. If that's true, it's actually kind of beautiful. A group of stranded, abandoned people found a way to survive by building relationships across a massive cultural divide. In a period of history defined by conflict and colonization, these 115 people may have quietly chosen a completely different path. We'll probably never know for sure, but the evidence leans that way. Here's where we stand in 2024. The First Colony Foundation is still actively excavating sites across North Carolina and the surrounding islands. New artifacts keep turning up. DNA research on the Lumbee continues. Nobody has declared the mystery solved, and any historian who tells you they know exactly what happened is lying to you. But the leading theory, supported by the most actual physical evidence, is the peaceful integration hypothesis. The colonists, facing starvation and abandonment, split up. Some went to Croatoan Island. Some may have moved further inland to live with other tribes. They left the word Croatoan as a message, not a cry for help. And they kept living, just not as English settlers anymore. John White carved that word into his memory for the rest of his life and never got his answer. We're still waiting for ours. The Roanoke colony is a mystery that will probably never be fully solved. But every excavation, every new artifact, every piece of evidence that surfaces brings us a little closer to understanding what those 115 people actually chose to do when the world abandoned them. And honestly, I find that more fascinating than any fictional horror story. If this kind of deep dive history is your thing, hit that subscribe button. I cover stories like this all the time. Real history that's stranger, darker, and more interesting than anything Hollywood could make up. There's a whole playlist of mysteries and forgotten history right up here. Go check it out. I promise you won't be disappointed. I'll see you in the next one.